What if the worst moment of your life was actually the beginning of it? For Ira Vance, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt, spilling a tray of scalding coffee on the city's most feared and reclusive billionaire, wasn't just a mistake, it was a catastrophe. She lost her job, her hope, and the last shred of her dignity. But what happened next is something no one could predict. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a single disastrous moment in a New York diner led to a mysterious first-class ticket to Paris, a confrontation in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, and a life-altering choice that would unravel a web of corporate intrigue, long-buried secrets, and an impossible connection. Stay with us. The smell of stale coffee and desperation clung to the air in the Gilded Spoon, a name far too glamorous for the tired 24-hour diner tucked away on a forgotten corner of Lexington Avenue. For Ira Vance, that smell was the scent of her life. It was the perfume of her reality, a constant reminder of the chasm between the life she lived and the one she sketched in the dog-eared notepad she kept tucked in the pocket of her apron. Each night, she drew dreams of Parisian architecture, of flowing gowns on runways of a world painted in colors richer than the faded vinyl of the diner's booths. Each day she served burnt coffee and greasy eggs to people whose faces blurred into a single weary portrait of the city's relentless grind. Her life ran on a razor's edge. Every dollar from her meager tips was a tightrope walker, balancing precariously between the rent for her shoebox apartment in Queens, the ever-increasing cost of her mother's medication, and the faint flickering hope of one day saving enough to re-enroll in the design program she'd been forced to abandon. The pressure was a physical weight, a permanent tension in her shoulders that no amount of sleep could ease. That Tuesday began like any other, a symphony of clattering plates, gruff orders, and the low hum of the ancient air conditioner. The lunch rush was a controlled chaos, a frantic ballet of bodies and trays that Ira usually navigated with a practiced weary grace. But today the air was different. It was charged heavy with an unspoken anticipation. The whispers had started around noon. A reservation. Not just any reservation. A private booking for the entire back section of the diner. Her boss, a perpetually stressed man named Sal, had been polishing the same spot on the counter for an hour. His brow furrowed. "Who is it?" Ira had asked, refilling a salt shaker. Sal had just shaken his head, his eyes wide. "Just be perfect, Ira. Please. For the love of God, don't drop anything." The subject of his anxiety arrived at precisely 1:00 p.m. The diner's bell, usually a cheerful jingle, sounded like a toll of doom. The door swung open, and a hush fell over the room. Even the sizzle of the grill seemed to hold its breath. He wasn't just a man. He was an event. Alistair Sterling. The name echoed in the silent diner, a name synonymous with power, wealth, and an almost mythical reclusiveness. He was the CEO of Sterling Conglomerates, a titan of global finance and tech, whose face was rarely seen outside the glossy pages of Fortune or Forbes. He was known for buying and dismantling companies with a surgical, merciless precision. He was a ghost who moved markets, a king in a kingdom of glass towers and digital empires, and he was standing in the doorway of the Gilded Spoon. He was flanked by two men in impeccably tailored suits who scanned the room with the emotionless efficiency of predators. Alistair himself was a study in severe elegance. His suit, a dark charcoal that probably cost more than Ira's annual income, fit him like a second skin. His hair was dark, flecked with silver at the temples, and his face was all sharp angles and unforgiving lines. But it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were a startling glacial blue, and they missed nothing. They swept over the chipped linoleum floors and the faded photographs on the wall with a look of detached, almost scientific curiosity. Sal scurried forward, wiping his sweaty palms on his apron. "Mr. Sterling, an honor, sir." "Right this way." Alistair's gaze flickered to Sal for a fraction of a second, an acknowledgement so fleeting it was barely there. He and his men were led to the back section, which had been cordoned off with a velvet rope that looked absurdly out of place. "I've got him another waitress," Maria whispered to Era, her hands trembling slightly. "Lord help me." Era felt a strange mix of relief and morbid curiosity. She watched as Maria approached the table, her movements stiff with nerves. The men spoke in low, clipped tones. Then one of the suits beckoned to Sal, who in turn gestured frantically at Era. Her blood ran cold. "Me," she mouthed. Sal nodded, his expression grim. "They want fresh coffee. The best pot. Go." "And Era," he added, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Don't mess this up." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she poured at the coffee. It was from a new batch, a slightly more expensive blend Sal kept for special occasions, though no occasion had ever been this special. The porcelain cups were the good ones, the ones without chips. Her hands, usually so steady, felt foreign and clumsy. She placed 4 cups, a silver pot of coffee, a creamer, and a sugar bowl onto her tray. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the kitchen door and began the long walk to the back of the diner. The world seemed to narrow, the ambient noise fading, until all she could hear was the frantic pounding of her own pulse. She focused on a spot on the far wall, a mantra of, "Don't trip, don't trip, don't trip," playing on a loop in her head. Alistair Sterling hadn't looked up. He and his associates had unrolled something on the table, a large, stiff sheet of paper. It looked like architectural blueprints, covered in intricate lines and elegant script. He was tracing one of the lines with his finger, his expression intense, focused. She was almost there. Just a few more feet. And then it happened. A child chasing a stray bouncy ball from the gumball machine darted out from between 2 booths directly into her path. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing. Era's gasp was silent. Her body twisted in an impossible contortion to avoid the child. Her ankle in its cheap, worn-out shoe gave way. The world tilted on its axis. The tray flew from her hands. The sound was apocalyptic. The shattering of porcelain echoed like a gunshot. But it was the silence that followed that was the most terrifying. A thick, dark, steaming river of coffee cascaded directly onto the center of the table, engulfing the pristine white blueprints in a tide of brown ruin. For a moment, no one moved. The child, wide-eyed, had already scurried back to his mother. Era was frozen on the floor, a sharp pain shooting up her ankle, but all she could see was the spreading stain. The coffee bled into the paper, warping it, blurring the delicate, precise lines into an ugly, indecipherable mess. She looked up, her gaze locking with Alistair Sterling's. The glacial blue eyes were fixed on her. There was no shouting, no explosion of rage. There was something far, far worse. A chilling, absolute stillness. The air around him seemed to drop 20 degrees. It was the calm at the eye of a hurricane, a quiet so profound it promised total devastation. One of his associates swore under his breath. The other looked like he'd seen a ghost. Alistair Sterling slowly lifted his gaze from the ruined blueprints to her face. His voice, when it finally came, was low, soft, and cut through the silence like a shard of ice. "Get out!" It wasn't a suggestion. It was a verdict. Tears of humiliation and terror pricked at Era's eyes. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the throbbing in her ankle. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for it." The words tumbled out, nonsensical and pathetic. Pay for it. How could she ever pay for something that was clearly priceless? He didn't even blink. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. He simply turned his head slightly towards Sal, who was standing by the kitchen door, his face the color of ash. "She's fired," Alistair stated, not looking at Era again. He had dismissed her from his reality as easily as one might brush away a fly. Sal didn't hesitate. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. Right away." He grabbed Era's arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and hauled her towards the back. "My bag. My things." She stammered, the world a dizzying blur. "I'll send them to you." "Sal," hissed his voice, trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "Just go. Get out of my sight before he decides to sue me into oblivion." He shoved her through the back door and into the grimy alleyway. The door slammed shut, the click of the lock sealing her fate. Era stood there for a long moment, the stench of garbage filling her lungs. The pain in her ankle was a dull throb, a distant echo of the gaping wound that had just been torn in her life. She had just spilled coffee on Alistair Sterling. She had been fired. She had no job, no prospects, and a mountain of bills that was now an unclimbable Everest. The dreams she had sketched in her notepad. Paris, the dresses, the life of color and beauty, had never felt so childish, so hopelessly far away. They were as ruined and blurred as the blueprints now lying soaked on that table. In the alley behind the Gilded Spoon, surrounded by the city's refuse, Era Vance finally allowed herself to cry. The next 48 hours were a descent into a grey, suffocating fog. Era limped home to her tiny apartment, each step a painful reminder of her epic failure. The world outside her window, the rumble of the elevated train, the distant sirens, the cacophony of life felt alien. She had been ejected from its rhythm, cast adrift in a sea of anxiety. She spent the first day in a state of shock, replaying the moment of the spill over and over in her mind. The slow-motion tilt of the tray, the dark splash and the terrifying dead calm in Alistair Sterling's eyes. It was a brand seared into her memory. She tried to call Sal, but her calls went straight to voicemail. She was officially a ghost. Her roommate and best friend Chloe, a pragmatic nursing student with a sharp tongue and a heart of gold, tried to break through the haze. "Okay, so you nuked a billionaire's lunch. It's not the end of the world," Chloe said, placing a mug of tea in Era's trembling hands. "The guy's probably got 1,000 of whatever that paper was. He's not going to hunt you down. You'll find another job, a better one that doesn't smell of regret and bacon grease." But Ira couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It wasn't just about the job. It was the sheer crushing finality of it. She had flown too close to a sun she didn't even know existed, and had had her wings incinerated. The incident had exposed her own fragility, the terrifying precarity of her existence. One wrong move, and everything could be gone. By the second day, the shock had curdled into a cold, hard panic. She sat at her small kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of her. Her mother's name was on the letterhead of the most urgent one. She picked up her phone and scrolled through job listings for waitressing gigs, her heart sinking with each experience required and references needed. What would she say? My last employer fired me on the spot because I destroyed an irreplaceable document belonging to one of the most powerful men in the world. The sketchbook lay open on the table, its pages filled with charcoal sketches of Notre Dame's flying buttresses and the delicate ironwork of Parisian balconies. Looking at them felt like a form of self-torture. They were relics of a future that was now permanently cancelled. It was late afternoon when the buzzer shrieked, a sound so loud and sudden it made her jump. Chloe was at the hospital on a clinical rotation. Ira wasn't expecting anyone. Her first thought was that it was the landlord coming to chase her for the rent. She now had no idea how to pay. She ignored it. It buzzed again, longer this time, more insistent. With a sigh of resignation, she limped to the intercom. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice raspy. A smooth, professional voice answered, devoid of any discernible emotion. A delivery for Miss Ira Vance. "Just leave it downstairs," she said, her hand already moving away from the button. "My instructions are to deliver it to you personally, ma'am." A shiver of unease traced its way down her spine. This was New York. Personal deliveries to the door were not standard procedure for a fifth-floor walk-up in Queens. Cautiously, she pressed the button to unlock the main door. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She waited by her apartment door, listening to the slow, measured footsteps ascend the 5 flights of stairs. They were heavy, confident steps. When the knock came, it was firm and precise. Ira opened the door a crack, the safety chain still engaged. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was a man who looked like he had stepped out of the same mold as Alistair Sterling's bodyguards. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with greying hair and a calm, paternal face. But his suit was just as expensive, his posture just as impeccable. He held a sleek black leather portfolio. "Miss Vance?" he asked. His eyes were kind, but they held a hint of weariness, as if he had seen too many strange things in his life to be surprised by this one. "Yes, my name is Arthur Covington. I am Mr. Sterling's executive assistant." Ira felt the blood drain from her face. This was it. He'd sent his man to serve her with a lawsuit. Her mind raced, picturing legal fees, court dates, financial ruin so complete it was comical. I don't have any money," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Whatever he thinks I owe him, I can't pay it." Arthur Covington offered a small, sad smile. "This isn't about money, Miss Vance." He held the portfolio out. "This is for you." Her fingers trembled as she undid the chain and took the portfolio. It was cool and smooth to the touch. It felt important. She backed into her apartment, leaving the door ajar, and placed it on the kitchen table as if it might explode. Inside there was a single heavy vellum envelope. Her name was written on it in elegant, severe calligraphy. With a sense of unreality, she broke the wax seal, a simple stylized S. The contents were baffling. There was a passport holder made of the softest blue leather. Tucked inside was her own passport, which she hadn't touched in years, and a single printed document. It was a first-class ticket on Air France, departing from JFK tomorrow evening. Destination Charles de Gaulle Airport, Paris. Underneath the ticket was a reservation confirmation for a suite at the Four Seasons Hotel George V, one of the most legendarily luxurious hotels in the world. The reservation was open-ended. Finally, at the very bottom was a single thick card. On it, a short typewritten message: "Ms. Vance, be ready for dinner." 8:00 p.m. Friday. A car will be waiting. A.S. Ira stared at the documents, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. Paris. The Four Seasons. Dinner. It made no sense. This had to be a joke. A cruel, elaborate, twisted joke designed to rub salt in the wound of her public humiliation. She looked up at Arthur Covington, who was still standing patiently in the doorway. "What is this? Is this some kind of sick prank?" "I can assure you, Miss Vance, Mr. Sterling does not have a sense of humor." Arthur said, his tone matter of fact. "The ticket is real. The reservation is confirmed. A car will collect you from your apartment tomorrow at 4:00 p.m. But why? The word was a breath full of confusion and fear. Why would he do this? He fired me. He looked at me like I was nothing. Arthur's gaze softened for a moment. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Mr. Sterling's motivations are his own. He is a complex man. All I was instructed to tell you is that he requires your presence in Paris. Requires it. Era laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. He can't require me to do anything. I don't work for him. I don't even have a job, thanks to him. No, he cannot, Arthur agreed calmly. It is, of course, a choice. But I have been instructed to inform you that should you accept a fund has been established to cover your mother's medical expenses for the next 5 years, in full. The air left Era's lungs. The room tilted. Her mother's medical bills. The crushing weight that dictated every decision she made, every hour she worked. The source of her deepest, most private terror. To have that lifted, it was a fantasy, a prayer she hadn't dared to voice. She sank into a chair, staring at the ticket, then at Arthur. The offer was a masterstroke of cruelty and genius. It wasn't a request. It was a checkmate. He had found her one vulnerability, the one thing she would do anything for, and he was leveraging it. But why? To what end? Was this some bizarre form of punishment? To fly her to Paris only to fire her again, this time on an international stage? "This is insane," she whispered. That is a word that has often been used to describe Mr. Sterling's methods, Arthur said with a faint, wry smile. He operates on a different plane than most of us, Ms. Vance, for better or for worse. He placed a business card on the small table by the door. "My number. The car will be here tomorrow. I hope you will be too." And with that he turned, and his measured footsteps descended the stairs, leaving Era alone in the sudden, deafening silence, holding a ticket to a dream that felt more like a summons to a nightmare. The flight was a surreal dream. Era, who had only ever flown once on a budget airline to visit a relative in Florida, was now cocooned in a private pod, sipping champagne she couldn't pronounce, and being called Mademoiselle by flight attendants with impossibly perfect smiles. She wore her best and only black dress, feeling like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Every luxury, from the noise-cancelling headphones to the lie-flat bed, felt like a beautiful, terrifying trap. She barely slept, her mind a whirlwind of speculation. Each theory was more outlandish than the last. Was he going to offer her a job as his personal coffee maker? Force her to scrub his Parisian penthouse floors as penance? The offer to pay her mother's medical bills was the only thing that kept her from bolting off the plane during a layover. It was a golden leash, and it was firmly around her neck. Landing at Charles de Gaulle was a shock to the system. The air smelled different. The language flowed around her like music, and a man holding a sign that read, "Vance," was waiting for her, just past customs. He whisked her away to a black Mercedes that sliced through the Parisian traffic with silent, unnerving efficiency. They drove past the Arc de Triomphe, a monument she had only ever seen in books, its grandeur stealing her breath away. The city was a living, breathing work of art. Every building, every wrought-iron balcony, every charming café seemed to mock her with its beauty, a beauty she was being brought to under the strangest and most sinister of circumstances. The Hotel Four Seasons. George V was not a hotel. It was a palace. A wave of vertigo washed over her as she stepped out of the car and into the lobby. The scent of thousands of fresh flowers arranged in breathtaking displays by the famed florist Jeff Leatham was dizzying. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and elegantly dressed guests spoke in hushed musical tones. Ira, clutching her worn-out suitcase, felt like a smudge on a masterpiece. A woman with a severe but polite demeanor greeted her. "Mademoiselle Vance, welcome. We have been expecting you." She was escorted directly to her suite, bypassing the check-in desk. The word suite didn't do it justice. It was larger than her entire queen's apartment. A living room with a fireplace, a bedroom with a cloud-like, king-sized bed, and a marble bathroom the size of a small kingdom. On the balcony, a perfect view of the Eiffel Tower, which was just beginning to glitter as dusk settled over the city. On a mahogany desk sat another thick, cream-colored card. The Louvre. Denon Wing, first floor. He will meet you there. There was no time mentioned. Confused and disoriented, Ira looked at the clock. It was just after 6:00 p.m. Dinner was supposed to be at 8 Usuals. Was this part of the dinner? A small, exquisitely wrapped box lay next to the card. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a simple, elegant cocktail dress of deep navy silk and a pair of low, classic heels. They looked like they would fit perfectly. The unspoken command was clear. Wear this. Feeling like a puppet whose strings were being pulled from an unimaginable height, Ira showered and dressed. The silk of the dress felt alien against her skin, a whisper of a life she could never have. As she looked at her reflection, a tired waitress from Queens dressed in Parisian couture, she felt a surge of defiance. She was terrified, yes, but she wouldn't be broken. She carefully took her old dog-eared sketchbook and a charcoal pencil from her bag and tucked them into the small clutch that had been provided. It was a piece of herself, a small anchor of identity in this overwhelming sea of luxury and control. A different car took her to the Louvre. The driver didn't speak, merely nodding when she confirmed her destination. The museum was closing to the public, the last few tourists straggling out of the Grand Pyramid entrance. But her driver spoke to a guard, and the velvet ropes were parted for her. She was led through echoing, empty galleries, her footsteps the only sound besides the distant hum of the building's life support. The feeling of being watched was immense. Masterpieces by Delacroix and David stared down at her from the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow her passage. She found the Denon Wing, and there, standing alone in the center of a vast empty hall, directly in front of Géricault's colossal painting. The raft of the Medusa was Alistair Sterling. He wasn't dressed for dinner. He wore dark trousers and a simple, dark grey cashmere sweater. He looked less like a billionaire titan and more like a scholar or a ghost haunting his favorite gallery. The theatricality of the setting was breathtaking and utterly terrifying. He didn't turn as she approached, his eyes fixed on the painting, a masterpiece of human suffering desperation and the faintest glimmer of hope on a distant horizon. "It is a study in chaos, isn't it?" he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the cavernous space. Desperate souls adrift on the wreckage of their own ambition, turning on one another, all because of the incompetence of their captain. Era stopped a few feet away from him, her hands clenched around her clutch. "Is that what I am to you, Mr. Sterling? A mutineer who sank your ship?" He finally turned to face her. The glacial blue eyes were just as intense as she remembered, but here, away from the harsh lights of the diner, they held a different quality. A profound, deep-seated weariness. "No, Miss Vance," he said, his gaze dropping for a moment to the clutch she was holding so tightly. "You are an anomaly." He took a step closer. "I imagine you have many questions." "Many doesn't begin to cover it," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Why am I here? Why pay for my mother's care? What is this elaborate, cruel game you're playing?" "It isn't a game," he said, his tone flat. He gestured to a simple bench nearby. "Please." She sat her back ramrod straight. He remained standing, looking from her to the painting and back again. "The blueprints you destroyed," he began, "were not for a bank or a skyscraper. They were the fifth and final draft of a design for a new pediatric oncology and research wing for the Hôpital Necker Enfants Malades here in Paris. A memorial project. It was personal." The words hit Era like a physical blow. A children's hospital. A memorial. The coffee stain felt infinitely uglier, now the weight of her blunder 100 times heavier. I had no idea," she stammered. "Of course you didn't," he said dismissively. "The point is, I have been stuck on the design for years. The world's best architects have submitted their proposals. They are all technically brilliant, cold, and utterly soulless. They design buildings. I am trying to build a place of hope in the midst of despair." He paused, his eyes finding hers. "When you fell, your apron pocket opened. A small sketchbook fell out, sliding under the edge of the table." Era's blood turned to ice. Her sketchbook. "After you were removed," he continued, "I was about to discard the ruined plans when my assistant Arthur found it. He gave it to me. I confess my initial impulse was to burn it along with everything else from that disastrous lunch." He took another step closer, his voice dropping. "But I opened it, and I saw this." From the inside pocket of his jacket, he produced a single, torn-out page. Her heart stopped. It was a quick, idle sketch she had done during a slow moment at the diner, a fantasy of a building facade. It was a blend of classic Art Deco lines and something softer, more organic, a sweeping glass atrium designed to look like a pair of cupped protective hands, sheltering a small garden within. At the bottom she had scribbled a note, "Where light can get in." "Your lines are amateur," he said, his critique as sharp and unsentimental as a surgeon's scalpel. "Your understanding of structural load-bearing is non-existent. But you, a waitress in a cheap diner in New York, managed to capture in a 5-minute doodle the one thing my world-renowned multi-million-dollar architects could not a soul." He held the sketch out to her. "This is why you are here, Ms. Vance. The dinner is a formality. This is a job interview. I am not offering you a date. I am offering you a contract. I don't want your apology. I want you to work with me, with my team, to help me infuse this project with the humanity it so desperately lacks." He let the silence hang in the air, thick with the weight of his impossible proposition. Ira stared at him, dumbfounded. The entire narrative of the past 2 days, the villainous billionaire, the cruel punishment, the terrifying summons, had just been shattered and reassembled into something infinitely more complex and unbelievable. He hadn't flown her to Paris to punish her. He had flown her here to hire her. "You want me, an unemployed waitress, to help you design a multi-million-dollar hospital wing?" She asked, the absurdity of the sentence hanging in the air between them. Precisely Alistair Sterling said, his face unreadable. "Of course you will be working under my lead architect. She will not be pleased. You will be tested. But the fund for your mother is not leverage, Ms. Vance. It is a retainer. Your choice is simple. You can take the money, fly home tomorrow, and we will never speak of this again. Or you can stay. You can stay and help me build a place where light can get in." To say Aira's world had been turned upside down was an understatement. It had been launched into a new orbit in a galaxy she didn't know existed. She accepted his offer. The word yes felt small and inadequate for the magnitude of the decision, but it was the only word that made sense. The alternative, returning to her old life knowing she had been offered this impossible chance, was unthinkable. The next morning, the gilded cage became her new reality. The Four-Season suite was now her home and office. A fleet of black cars was at her disposal. A bank account had been opened in her name, with a balance that made her feel nauseous. But every luxury came with an invisible price tag expectation. Her first official day began not in a dusty studio, but in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom on the top floor of the Sterling conglomerate's European headquarters, a sleek, modernist tower that loomed over the historic heart of Paris. The view of the city was panoramic and breathtaking, but inside the air was frigid. Alistair was there, of course, standing at the head of a long marble table. But it was the woman standing beside him who immediately became the focal point of Aira's anxiety. She was introduced as Genevieve Dubois. Genevieve was everything Aira was not. She was impossibly chic, with sharp, intelligent eyes, a severe black bob, and an aura of intellectual and professional superiority that was as palpable as the expensive perfume she wore. She was the lead architect, a celebrated name in the field known for her brutalist-inspired minimalist designs that were hailed as visionary by critics and feared by contractors. When Alistair introduced Aira, he did so with his typical blunt economy of words. "This is Aira Vance. She is a consultant on this project. She will be providing an alternative perspective. Her input is to be considered essential." Genevieve's perfectly sculpted lips tightened into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile that could freeze water. She looked Aira up and down, taking in her simple dress, her nervous posture, her lack of pedigree. It wasn't a glance. It was a dissection. A consultant. Genevieve's voice was smooth, with a rich melodic French accent that she weaponized with deadly precision. How charming. "And what is your field of expertise?" "Mademoiselle Vance. Your firm." "She doesn't have a firm," Alistair interjected before Aira could stammer out a reply. "Her expertise is a raw, untoured aesthetic, something this project currently lacks." The insult, clearly directed at Genevieve, was not lost on anyone in the room. The tension thickened. Genevieve's smile remained fixed, but a dangerous light flickered in her eyes. The battle lines had been drawn. The days that followed were a grueling immersion into a world of blueprints, 3D renderings, and architectural jargon that flew over Aira's head. She was the ugly duckling in a flock of viciously territorial swans. The rest of the architectural team followed Genevieve's lead, treating Era with a polite, dismissive condescension that was more infuriating than open hostility. They would listen to her suggestions with patient smiles nod, and then immediately disregard them. Her ideas born from emotion and a desire for warmth and comfort were systematically dismantled by Genevieve's cold logic. A children's library with rounded hobbit-hole doorways, Genevieve had scoffed during one meeting holding up one of Era's sketches. Structurally unsound and frankly infantilizing. These are sick children, not characters in a storybook. They require efficiency and sterility, not whimsy. They're children, Era had countered, her voice trembling slightly. Whimsy and stories might be the only thing they have left. A hospital doesn't have to feel like a prison. Genevieve had simply raised a perfectly plucked eyebrow and looked at Alistair. An emotional sentiment. Very quaint. But Alistair wouldn't let them dismiss her entirely. He would watch these exchanges with his unreadable, intense gaze. Often he would side with Genevieve on technical points, but then hours later, Era would receive a clipped email from him. Elaborate on the storybook concept. The core idea has merit. The execution is flawed. Find a way to make it work. Their own interactions were strange and stilted. They were not friends, not colleagues in the traditional sense. He was her patron, her employer, her inscrutable puppet master. They worked late into the nights in his private office, a minimalist sanctuary of steel and glass overlooking the Seine. He would push her, challenging every sketch, every idea. Why this curve? What does it communicate, he would demand, jabbing a finger at one of her drawings. Don't tell me how it feels. Explain the visual language. Justify it. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to learn. She started to connect her raw, intuitive creativity with the technical language of design. She spent hours in the hotel suite, devouring the architecture books Arthur had delivered, teaching herself the principles of form, function, and light. And in those late-night sessions, the sterile professional facade would occasionally crack. She saw glimpses of the man behind the myth. She learned the memorial wing was for his younger brother Luke, who had died of leukemia at the age of 9 in a hospital that had been grey, frightening, and devoid of hope. The project wasn't about charity. It was an act of atonement, a way to build the sanctuary for other children that his brother never had. One evening, as they worked, a thunderstorm broke over Paris. The rain lashed against the panoramic windows of his office. Era was sketching an idea for a rooftop garden, a place where children too sick to go to a park could feel the sun and wind. He loved the rain. Alistair said, his voice so quiet, she almost missed it. He was looking out at the storm, his reflection a faint ghost against the glittering rain-streaked city. He would stand at the window for hours. He said it was the world crying so he didn't have to. It was the most vulnerable thing he had ever said to her. In that moment, he wasn't the feared billionaire Alistair Sterling. He was just a man haunted by the ghost of a little boy who loved the rain. Without thinking, Era reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm. He flinched, as if her touch was an electric shock. He looked down at her hand, then up at her face, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else, something she couldn't decipher. The air crackled with a new kind of tension, one that had nothing to do with blueprints and everything to do with the space between them. He pulled his arm away, not unkindly, and straightened up the professional mask, slamming back into place. The garden concept is promising, he said, his voice once again cool and distant. Develop it further. But the moment lingered. A line had been crossed. Genevieve noticed the shift too. She saw the way Alistair would occasionally look at Era, when he thought no one was watching. She saw how Era's ideas, once dismissed as amateurish, were now being subtly incorporated into the master plan. The protective hands atrium, which Genevieve had ridiculed, was now the centerpiece of the new design, albeit rendered with her own technical flair. Era's victory was Genevieve's humiliation, and she was not a woman who tolerated humiliation. Her attacks became more personal, more insidious. She began to sow seeds of doubt. "One must be careful, Alistair," she said to him one afternoon. Her voice a sympathetic purr after Era had left the room. "This girl, she is a compelling story. The poor waitress plucked from obscurity. The media will adore it. One might even think it was cleverly orchestrated." She would praise Era's work with backhanded compliments. "It has a certain naive charm. It is a shame she lacks the formal training to truly execute it. But of course, that is what I am here for." Era felt the pressure mounting. She was trapped in a gilded cage, living a life of unimaginable luxury, yet more stressed and isolated than she had ever been in her life. She was fighting a war on two fronts, one to prove her artistic worth, and another against a rival who was smarter, more experienced, and infinitely more ruthless. The breaking point came during a major presentation to the hospital board. Genevieve unveiled the latest 3D model. It was stunning, a masterpiece of light and form. And at its heart was the atrium, the garden, the library, with curved, welcoming doorways. It was Era's soul clothed in Genevieve's technical genius. One of the board members, an elderly doctor, looked at the model with tears in his eyes. "It is magnificent, Mademoiselle Dubois. It feels hopeful." Genevieve inclined her head graciously, accepting the praise. She caught Era's eye across the table and gave her the smallest, most triumphant of smiles. The message was clear. "You may have had the ideas, but I am the one who gives them form. I am the architect. You are nothing." That night, Era didn't work. She walked for hours along the Seine, the sketchbook heavy in her bag. The city's beauty, once so enchanting, now felt oppressive. She was an imposter here, a ghost haunting someone else's life. The dream had become a battlefield, and she was beginning to fear she didn't have the strength to win. In the weeks that followed, the project gained a powerful momentum. The tense professional arrangement between Ira and Alistair thawed into something more. The late-night work sessions became less about interrogation and more about collaboration, a creative fusion where his logic met her emotion. They discovered a shared language, not of words but of form and shadow. In the space between them, the project truly came to life. Alistair began to change. The cold, dismissive Titan started to recede, revealing glimpses of the man he might have been. He took her to quiet museums, and they would talk for hours about art and light. And for the first time, Era didn't feel like an employee. She felt like a partner. The fear that had been her constant companion began to be replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. This evolution was not lost on Genevieve. Every shared glance between Alistair and Era, every one of Era's ideas that was now celebrated, was a fresh wound to her pride. She saw her influence waning her position as Alistair's trusted visionary being usurped by a novice. Her polite condescension curdled into a quiet, simmering rage. She had to remove Era from the equation, not just to reclaim her project, but to reclaim Alistair himself. Her plan was a masterpiece of corporate sabotage, subtle and devastating. It began with a competitor, Ledoux and Partners, who were hungry for a piece of the project's prestige. Genevieve knew they were desperate for insider information. The core of Era's most personal contribution was the Garden of Whispers, a therapeutic sensory garden she had poured her heart into. It was the soul of the project. Through back channels, Genevieve arranged a clandestine meeting and presented a slightly altered version of Era's garden concept to an executive from Ledoux. It was enough to be recognizable, but different enough that she could claim parallel thinking if caught. The next phase was to frame Era. It was shockingly simple. Late one evening, knowing Era was working, Genevieve used a master keycard to enter Era's suite at the George V. She found what she was looking for. Era's primary sketchbook. With gloved hands, she scanned several pages, including the most detailed drawings of the Garden of Whispers. She then used a burner email address, routing the signal through multiple proxies to make it untraceable, and sent the scanned images to her contact at Ledoux. The subject line was simple, as per our agreement. The trap was set. The bomb detonated 2 days later. An emergency meeting was called. Alistair stood at the head of the table, his face a mask of cold fury, holding a tablet displaying an article from a financial newspaper. The headline was devastating. Ledoux and Partners unveils revolutionary, therapeutic hospital design. Leaking Sterling's top-secret project. The article contained renderings. And there it was, a sensory garden, the core of Era's idea twisted and commercialized, but undeniably hers. The room was silent. Genevieve looked horrified, a perfect pantomime of shock. "How is this possible?" she whispered. Alistair's glacial eyes scanned the faces of his team before finally landing on Era. Her own face was white with disbelief. Our internal security team ran a full diagnostic. Alistair said, his voice dangerously low. The breach was not from our servers. It was a direct transfer of image files. Genevieve chose her moment perfectly. "Alistair," she said, her voice laced with feigned reluctance. She slid her own tablet across the table. Our IT flagged an outgoing encrypted data packet from the hotel's network, from Mademoiselle Vance's suite, 2 nights ago. The file size is consistent with high-resolution image scans. Era stared dumbfounded. "What? That's impossible. I never... The timing is unfortunate." Genevieve continued, her eyes full of faux pity. "Ledoux and Partners is based in Lyon. And your mother, her clinic is just outside Lyon, is it not? A sudden influx of cash into her accounts. People might ask questions. A prestigious firm like Ledoux would certainly pay handsomely for a winning concept." The implication was venomous, twisting Era's love for her mother into a motive for betrayal. Era looked at Alistair, her heart hammering, expecting him to see through the lie. But she saw something in his eyes that shattered her. The warmth was gone. In its place was the old familiar ice. He was the man who expected betrayal, who saw a girl from poverty, a sick mother, a perfect recipe for desperation. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice flat. "Did you sell us out, Ms. Vance?" "No." Era's voice cracked. "Alistair, you have to believe me. Genevieve is lying." Genevieve let out a small, wounded gasp. "To accuse me, after I have done nothing but try to mentor you." Alistair held up a hand, silencing them. He looked at Era, his face unreadable, his eyes holding the cold, dead weight of disappointment. He didn't believe her. "I believe I have heard enough," he said. He looked at Arthur, his loyal assistant. "Arthur, please arrange for Ms. Vance's immediate return to New York. The retainer for her mother's care will be honored. Her contract is, of course, terminated." He didn't look at her again. He turned and strode out of the room, leaving Era in the echoing silence. Genevieve watched her, a single, perfect tear of victory rolling down her cheek. The gilded cage had slammed shut. Humiliation, sharp and bitter, washed over her. He hadn't just fired her. He had convicted her without a trial. Numbly, she allowed Arthur to escort her from the building. Back in the beautiful suite that was no longer hers, she packed her bags. The silk dress, the expensive shoes, she left them all behind. She packed her old jeans, her worn-out sweater, and her sketchbook. It was all she had left. The silence in the aftermath of Era's departure was heavier than any storm. Alistair threw himself into the project with a renewed, ferocious intensity, trying to cauterize the wound of his disappointment with work. Genevieve was reinstated as the unquestioned lead, her dominion over the project absolute. But something was wrong. The plans were technically perfect, but the magic, the spark that Ira had ignited, had vanished. The building was once again becoming cold, a beautiful but sterile monument. Alistair found himself walking the halls of his office at night, restless and irritable. He told himself it was the sting of betrayal, but a deeper, more unsettling feeling was taking root doubt. The piece that didn't fit was Era's reaction. He had seen corporate traitors before. They were slick or defiant. Era had been none of those. She had been heartbroken. The look in her eyes hadn't been fear or guilt. It had been a profound, shattering wound. A few days after her departure, he was reviewing a final schematic when his mind drifted back to Era's sketchbook, which he had kept locked in his desk, a sentimental impulse he couldn't explain. He unlocked the drawer and opened it. Flipping through the pages, he saw a tiny, almost unnoticeable doodle in the corner of one page. It was a small fountain shaped like a dandelion that had gone to seed, designed so water would trickle down the delicate stems. Beside it, a scribbled note for wishing on. A memory surfaced of a story she'd told him about believing dandelions held the world's wishes. A story he had dismissed. A story Genevieve could not possibly have known. A cold dread began to seep into him. He buzzed his assistant. "Arthur." "Get in here." Arthur entered, his face etched with worry. "You've been with me for 20 years, Arthur Alistair said, not looking up. "Tell me what you really thought." Arthur hesitated. "I thought you were making a terrible mistake, sir. I still do. That girl has more integrity in her little finger than most executives in this building. And Genevieve Dubois. She has always been ambitious." This felt like hatred. Alistair closed the sketchbook. The hotel security footage from Era's floor, the night of the data transfer. "I want to see it." "Sir, I already requested it." The hotel claimed the cameras on that hallway were malfunctioning. A convenient glitch, Arthur said, his skepticism clear. "Then get me everything else," Alistair commanded. "Genevieve's access logs, her driver's logs, her phone records. I don't care what it takes. Dig." It took Arthur less than 24 hours. The truth, when it was laid bare on Alistair's desk, was a testament to Genevieve's cunning and her single fatal flaw, arrogance. She had used a company car for her clandestine meeting and tried to bury the payment to her contact in catering expenses. The damning evidence came from her work computer, the ghost of a deleted high-resolution scan of a sketchbook page time-stamped just minutes before the untraceable email had been sent. The betrayal was real. He had just accused the wrong woman. The weight of his error was crushing. He hadn't just fired an innocent woman. He had broken the trust of the one person who had managed to breach the fortress around his heart. An apology was not enough. This required a grand gesture, not of wealth, but of humility. He didn't call. He didn't send a car. 2 days later, Ira was in her queen's apartment when a knock came at the door. She opened it to find Alistair Sterling standing in her cramped hallway, looking utterly out of place. He was alone. "Ira," he said, his voice raw. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her heart a wild bird in her chest. "I came to beg for your forgiveness. I was wrong. About everything. I know what Genevieve did. She's been fired. Sued. She won't work again." He held out a sleek portfolio. "This is a statement." Inside, she found the final official press release for the project. The credit line read, "Lead visionary and concept designer, Ira Vance." Beneath it was a rendering of the finished hospital wing. At its center was a beautiful fountain shaped like a dandelion gone to seed. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't understand." "I am a fool, Ira," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard. "I've spent my life expecting betrayal. You showed me a world of trust, and I threw it away because I was a coward. The project is nothing without you. It has no soul. I have no soul without you." He took a step closer. "The job, the money, that was a transaction. I want to start over. Contracts. Just us. Let me take you to dinner. Here, we can go to the Gilded Spoon. I promise not to spill the coffee." A tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. He had come to her not as a billionaire, but as a man admitting his faults, offering not a job, but his heart. He had heard her wish on a dandelion and flown across an ocean to make it come true. The future was no longer a blank page. It was a blueprint they could design together. With a watery, shaky but genuine smile, Ira Vance finally gave him her answer. "I'd like that very much." And so a story that began with a spilled coffee cup in a humble diner didn't end with a fairy tale wedding in a Parisian palace. It ended with a beginning built not on power or money, but on forgiveness, mutual respect, and the shared dream of building something beautiful in a broken world. Ira and Alistair's journey shows us that our worst moments don't have to define us, and that sometimes the most unexpected collisions can lead us exactly where we need to be. It's a reminder that true vision isn't just about seeing what is, but what could be. And that the most valuable things in life, trust, creativity, and love, can't be bought or sold. If this story moved you, please give this video a like. It really helps our channel grow. Share it with someone who loves a story of second chances, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for watching.